So today I'm going to show you how to become a millionaire even if you have a low income. So I'm going to give you a real world example. If you go to business school, this will be called a case study. So anyway, there's this guy, his name was Ronald Read. When he died with over $8 million to his name. He gave a lot of that money to a hospital as well as a library he frequented in his later years in life. So Ronald Read was a philanthropist, but that's not how he started. So he got his start in World War II in the Army. He worked as a gas station attendant and mechanic for 25 years. And then he worked for another 17 years as a janitor for J.C. Penney's. So he invested in Procter & Gamble. They make a lot of paper products. General Electric, they make a lot of appliances in your home. Smucker's is jelly and jams and things like that. Johnson & Johnson was healthcare. Dow Chemical, of course, is chemicals. Lehman Brothers, they actually went bankrupt. It still didn't bankrupt them. So the thing that you want to do when you invest in boring things that you understand. Make sure that they're in different areas. If you see that none of these are really overlapping that much. So if one area, say in the 2009 crash, a lot of banks went under, if he had only banks, he would have lost most of his money. But because it's diversified across these as well as many others, it was an insignificant portion of his portfolio. I think it was like 2% or so. So you don't want to put a lot of money in any one place. Just think of it as you don't want to carry a whole bunch of eggs in one basket. If you drop it, they all break. So there's three things that you can really do. If you're young, you have the best thing, time. Money invested is another one, and rate of return. So depending on which one of these you want to pull, how do you get to $1 million? Let's say you're very young. If someone's only 25 years old, let's say, they have 40 years till they're 65. They put away $13.15 per day at an annualized rate of return of 7%. Well, guess what? That gets you to $1 million. Or if you want to go a little bit quicker, say at 35 years, so let's say you save that same $13.15 per day. If you can squeak out 8% returns after inflation, within 35 years, you're going to have $1 million in that account. Now, what if you get that 8%, but you can't spend $13.15 per day? Well, $8.29 a day at 8% annualized rate of return over a 40-year period will also give you $1 million. Or if you wanted, you can go $32.88 at 7%, and that would get you to the same spot in 28 years, just for your awareness. But here's the thing, once you get to $1 million, a 7% annualized rate of return, that's $70,000 a year. Now, there's Monte Carlo and other analysis that you should only withdraw about 4% per year in retirement, but that's just an idea of how did people get to $1 million? How did somebody become a millionaire when they don't make that much? So even $8.29 a day at an 8% annualized rate of return over a 40-year period will get to $1 million. Or if you have more time, say you're 20 and you do this for 45 years or 47 years, you can get to well over $1 million, even with a very small quantity of money per day. Now, where do you get this 7% annualized rate of return? Well, let's say you go to the S&P 500. If you look at that, it's returned 10.7% annualized rate of return over the last 30 years. Now, we're going to assume that, okay, that's before you take into account inflation. Because if I buy groceries today versus groceries last year, groceries cost more money today. A house costs more money this year than last year, so you have to account for inflation. So inflation could be anywhere from, let's say, 2 to 4%. So I'm going to say that I'm assuming it's about a 7 to 8% return once I subtract out inflation. Now, you also want to be aware that expense ratios are important. So people get bored with this. But if you, say, for example, want to invest in something like the S&P 500, you can do that with low-cost index funds or mutual funds. So the SPY is the biggest ETF out there, and that has an expense ratio of 0.09%. VOO is very similar, it's 0.03%. And FXAIX is from Fidelity, that's effectively a mutual fund, that's 0.015, I just round to 2. But think of how low those are. And then if you go to an actively managed fund, you're going to be paying between 1 to 2% cost or expense ratio each and every year. Now, the other thing with the active funds and hedge funds, over 90% of them over a 20-year period will not actually beat any of these. It won't even keep up with the S&P 500. Of course, in any down year, maybe, 30, 40+% of them will actually beat the S&P for that 1 or 2 year period. But if you look at that same thing over the course of 10, 20 years, and if you're investing for a long period of time, I'm not looking for a gain in 1 year. I'm looking for consistent gains over the life of my investments. So I'm going to go with these guys rather than active hedge funds, because I have a 90% chance that these will outperform anything I pick here. And if people that devote their careers to picking stocks are wrong 90% of the time, why am I going to try to do all this myself? I don't want to devote my life to just stocks. So I'm going to keep it simple. These have given returns of 10.7% year over year on average. Some years they go down 20%, some years they go up 30%, but overall, for a long duration over the last 30 years, they've gone up over 10.7% when you reinvest the dividends. All investments can lose value. There's no guarantees. Past performance does not guarantee future returns, but I'm going to bet on the top 500 US companies that they're going to try to make money, and if I own part of that company, effectively, they're paying me as part owner. So this has companies from all different sectors, and it's the biggest 500 companies in the United States. So names in here could include, Google, Tesla, Amazon, Microsoft, Nvidia, Ford, General Motors, Visa, MasterCard, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, just a ton of these. I think Smuckers, J&J, Dow Chemical, all those good companies. GE came out of there because they almost went bankrupt. So in any given year, you could lose money. I've seen losses of 30% in a year, but then the following year you might gain 30%, 40%. So even when you look at what happened in 2020, so you have this quick downturn and then followed by a boom after that. So if you've enjoyed this content, please subscribe. I'm going to be going over how to save money on taxes, how to invest, and how to make more money. So if you don't want to live in your children's basement when you retire, start this now.